Alex Green is Directing Analyst IoT at IHS. Alex, let's talk about IoT. People have been talking for quite some years now about the potential number of connected devices we're going to see over the next decade or so. But number of devices is only one thing and connectivity is one thing. What are the next steps that need to be considered as well?
Well, for me, I think you've almost got to stop thinking of IoT as one thing, one system, and really start to then look at the individual application areas. And what it means for each of those application areas can be quite different. If you're talking about a consumer home automation application versus a industrial automation versus energy versus building automation, what next for IoT can be have a really different meaning. But I think what's crucial across them all is to really start to utilize that connectivity that IoT has brought. So connectivity has been the discussion point at first. We talk about lots of billions of connected devices, but it's actually now how do we utilize that connectivity? What data are we pulling from those connected devices? How are we using that data? How are we collecting it? What sort of big data analytics tools are being used to pull out useful information? How are different siloed data sets being brought together in order to provide really useful information from those systems? How much data is actually kept on the local area network at the edge and processed there versus put over the wide area network? And I think they're some of the crucial questions that we've got to look at now in relation to IoT. And platforms to some extent. We've seen a lot of announcements about platforms, and new platforms that are being put in place will certainly help and make it easier for end users to start to utilize that data and take meaningful actions from that information. But I guess the next challenge after that is then less to do with technology, but more to do with people and processes. I think in many ways a lot of the technology barriers are they've either been overcome or certainly on the verge of being overcome. And I think the next challenge for IoT will be the analytics and then the business process re-engineering particularly within the industrial sector and enterprise sector, and how that data is used, how processes are made more efficient, how predictive analytics is used within a factory, for example, how energy savings are used within a building using IoT over building automation.
And do you think it's a healthy development that the industry seems to be becoming slightly less infatuated with how many billions of devices and thinking a little bit more about these stages?
I think it's, in some ways, yeah, it's been a bit of a natural hype cycle. It's certainly, as the industry was relatively embryonic, it was easy to talk about the big numbers. That's what caught people's attention. But I think it's healthy now that conversation seems to be moving on. The big numbers still exist, but people really want to get underneath those a little bit more and take away the kind of, the so what implication from that. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my business? How am I going to have more efficient processes in the future using the data?
Yeah, it almost feels as if there's a little bit more of a let's get down to it attitude.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a fair summary of the situation.
So in the light of what you've said, Alex, what role do you see platforms have in the emerging IoT ecosystem, and how will platforms help companies and organizations to bring solutions to market?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of activity in relation to IoT platforms over recent months. I was at the big IoT World event in Santa Clara last month, and I'd say that was a common theme of most of the companies that I spoke to at that event. They had some sort of platform that they were launching or bringing to market or talking about at the event. And on one hand, I think platforms are going to be essential in enabling organizations using IoT to really get the greatest benefit from IoT. But at the same time, I can imagine for companies looking at the IoT ecosystem, trying to understand how platforms fit together, what sort of platforms there are, who the different platform providers are, and how they all fit together is pretty complex. And certainly we see, you've also got to be careful not to be comparing apples with pears in terms of the platforms. We see distinct platform types being available in order to bring IoT solutions to market. Certainly for MNOs, there's the connectivity platform, which is very much around managing the SIM that might be connected to an LTE device, for example, and how that's provisioned over the air. There's then device management platforms, which are more in relation to actually managing how the device works, the operating system, the kind of abilities that device has to work with the network. There's then application enablement platforms, which are really about allowing application developers to bring innovative applications to market quickly that could then be fitted into that wider platform ecosystem. There's data management platforms, which are very much about bringing disparate data sets together in order to really start to extract big data analytics out of IoT. So you might have data from an ERP system and then data from your factory floor in terms of production and how machinery is performing, and that data platform is really that platform that joins those different data sets together in order to improve efficiencies. Then, of course, there's data center and cloud platforms. These are the platforms that Amazon Web Services and others are offering in order to host a lot of the services and data that's been generated in relation to IoT. So yes, platforms are a key enabler for taking IoT to the next generation, but it's a complex ecosystem at the moment, and it must be a challenge to some extent for users of IoT, particularly in enterprise and business and industrial, to understand how all those different platforms fit together.
Do you think, following hard on the heels of this rapid series of emerging platforms, there's going to be a rapid series of consolidation and disappearing platforms?
Yeah, potentially. A lot of those different platform types that I mentioned there are often offered together as part of a wider platform footprint. And I think to some extent that'll become increasingly important that platform providers are putting those different parts of the building block together. That being said, I still think there are places for specialists that are, focusing purely on data aggregation and bringing different data sets together, compared to those that are really focusing on the connection platform.
Okay. Let's think about narrowband IoT. What place will low-power wide-area networks have in the rollout of Internet of Things?
I think the opportunity for low-power wide-area networks, including license such as narrowband IoT, is massive in the wider IoT ecosystem. I think as the standardization process with the 3GPP has moved along relatively rapidly now, and we're going to have NB IoT standardized over the coming weeks, that's a really good step forward for the industry, and I think that opens up the potential for wide area networks to service IoT markets that would perhaps otherwise out of their reach,
right,
where it was more of a gateway-centric market using short-range, low-power wireless technologies. And at the same time, the opportunity also exists for the unlicensed low-power wide-area network technologies, LoRa, UMB with Sigfox, and then more recently the announcement that the weightless SIG is bringing it standard under the umbrella of ETSI. These technologies also have an important part to play in terms of the low-power wide-area network market within IoT. And I think there's certainly room for both, for the licensed technologies and the unlicensed technologies, for slightly different application areas and different business types. So I think the opportunity is going to be massive. I think they're going to be disruptive. They're going to impact that other market for some of the short-range, low-power wireless technologies that were more gateway-centric in terms of their architecture. And we certainly think that in some applications around utilities, smart cities, public safety, these low power wide area network solutions will have a big part to play over the coming years.
And in your opinion, in both licensed and unlicensed?
Yeah, certainly. I think the unlicensed technologies have had a head start to some extent because of the standardization process through 3GPP. And while we still think there's certainly a big opportunity for the unlicensed solutions, we think that the NB-IoT will perhaps cap some of that in certain application areas once it becomes available. But certainly in the long term, we see a place for both the licensed and the unlicensed solutions.
And is narrowband IoT in licensed spectrum an area of opportunity for the traditional telcos, would you consider?
So the traditional mobile network operators? I certainly think so. It's an opportunity in terms of connections. It will use their existing legacy LTE networks, and so they're well primed to take advantage of the standard once it's rolled out in terms of providing connectivity. The challenge that's maybe a little bit less clear is just how they really monetize that opportunity.
The business model.
Connectivity alone may not necessarily provide a great revenue stream for them. It's whether or not they can also sell the wider services around managing that connectivity that I think will be the crucial factor for the extent to which that presents an opportunity for the traditional telcos.
So jumping forward 10 years, how does IHS see the IoT ecosystem will be, and what will be the challenges that are being faced at that stage?
Again, I think this comes back to one of the points I made at the very beginning of our discussion, in that IoT is not one thing. It is impacting every industry that we're looking at, whether it's security, consumer electronics, factory automation. It's hitting everything. It's about putting sensors, intelligence, and processing into what is currently otherwise dumb devices,
yes,
and then using that information to improve processes and building efficiencies. So I think in 10 years' time, in many ways, we may not be talking about IoT to the extent that we are now. It will become the new norm in many of the different businesses that we're looking at. We won't be talking about smart thermostats. Thermostats will just be smart. We won't be talking about intelligent buildings. The technology in building automation will be utilising IoT, and it will just be building automation. So I think that's not to downplay the impact of IoT. The impact of IoT will be massive, and we'll still be grappling with some of the challenges that brings. I think in 10 years' time, we'll still be trying to pull out the efficiencies and pull out the changes in processes that IoT offers. But I think the very much for the different industries that we're looking at, it will be the new norm for those industries. And IoT as a cross-cutting, cross-vertical term may start to disappear as it becomes the standard modus operandi for the different industries that we're looking at.
Will we have stopped talking about IoT standards by that time?
That's another good question. I think the standards issues, particularly around connectivity, will still be there. I can't envisage that there will be a one-size-fits-all solution for connectivity for devices, no, even in 10 years' time. I think that trade-off between finding a solution that's most suitable for your application versus trying to get a harmonised solution that cross-cuts across all different industries won't have been resolved, and we'll still have multiple standards for different applications. I imagine there will be less, but I think just because of the nature of what IoT is and the various industries that it's playing in, say it's impacting every single industry, and the use cases are vastly different from battery-operated, low-data sensor devices to autonomous vehicles. Having a wireless standard that addresses the needs of those kind of extremes of applications, I think is very unlikely in a 10-year time frame.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Alex. I'm absolutely certain that I and many more people will continue to look to IHS to help us understand trends and the way that the IoT will develop over those coming years. Thank you.
Thank you.
soon.